to somewhat of a normal semblance of normal happens, but who knows when that will be, right?
Yeah. It will. They said 18 months.
Well, I'm optimistic that it'll be earlier. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
There's Jeff.
Jeff's here.
Yeah.
Jeff's here.
Morning, Jeff.
Morning, Jeff.
Out.
Hi, Trish. Is Trish there?
She's wandering up and down the hallway. Just a minute. She'll be back in a minute.
Okay.
She's getting her exercise.
Yeah. Yeah. There, you can see her over my left shoulder here.
Yes, now we can see her. Yeah.
Yeah.
Here we are. Come sit down for a minute. People want to say hello.
Okay.
No, sit down.
Okay.
No, go for a walk. I'd rather she went for a walk. This will be a while. She's in her walking mode.
Oh,
No,
keep
cool.
going.
Donna, you got sunshine out there in Surrey?
Sort of.
Yeah, we sort of don't have it here.
But I had 2 rabbits in my yard this morning.
2 what?
Rabbit?
2 rabbits.
Oh.
Yeah.
Did you steal those on your last Victoria tour from you, Vic?
No.
You didn't bring any deer over from Oak Bay, did you?
No.
Okay, good.
Donna,
Yep.
what color did you paint the rabbits?
The one I'm painting is going to be dark brown with white streaks.
Okay, like your hair?
I love you too, George. This is natural. Didn't cost me anything for my hair.
Good.
How about you?
I've lost all my color.
Hey, Patrick, did you pick up your car in Seattle? You're muted. Oh, there you
Yeah,
go.
I'm muted. But yes, I flew down last week on Thursday. That's the loophole. And
Right.
it worked. And I picked up the car right away from the airport. And well, for my friends, I took a taxi, but it was really quick. I was in a bubble the whole time. I was back in Canada within 5 hours.
Oh my God. And they
And
let you
I-
back in.
Yeah, they let me back in, but I'm on my last day of
Of-
2 weeks
Of quarantine again. Yeah.
quarantine. So here I am at home watching you guys. And I haven't been out of the house for the last 2 weeks, but I'm good. No problem.
Wow.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, I actually got a 2-for-1 thing from the Crystal Lodge in Whistler, so I decided to take it last weekend. And
Ooh.
I went on the Peak to Peak gondola, and on July 1st, I was the first person on the gondola and the first person at the top, so I had the top of the mountain to myself for about 20 minutes.
Oh, that's great.
Oh, that's awesome.
Nice.
Yeah, it was. So yeah, they're opening up and they're doing a really good job too. They all the stores everyone's masked. They have pumps of hand sanitizer. So if you do go, to a tourist destination, take lots of hand cream with you because your hands will get really dry.
Yeah.
Can you say
Good. Well,
hello?
I'm glad to hear.
Yeah. There's Trish there.
Hi, Trish.
Oh, you're interfering with her view out the window here.
Nice
Okay.
view.
Yeah. All right. I'll put the virtual view up in a minute there. She's off down the hallway, so very good. Okay, is Matthew there this morning?
He is, but he's muted.
Somewhere.
Feitje bunu örnek tutacak başka ağaçlar bulunur.
All the Vox recordings are in the public domain.
Okay, so if we get
Here,
everyone to virtual background and do this. Okay.
won't give up the chair. I say I am better in the art than he.
Do we hear him asking us? Why don't you?
He'll do the grand at first. The jug.
Okay, welcome everybody. Let me just hit some more buttons here, and yeah, that's is our lovely guest Stephen. Are you out there somewhere, Stephen? Oh, Stephen Regan, are you there yet? Okay, talk amongst yourselves. I'll give you a topic. Let me just hit the. I've got to check the emails, see if something's happened here. All right. see here. We'll open this one up. Okay. Once we're looking for our guest, Stephen Regan. Are you on the call yet, Stephen? Matthew, you're handling the waiting area, waiting room, right?
Yeah, I've clicked him in. I'm just waiting for him to show up.
Okay, that's good.
I'm on.
Okay, hi. Wait one second. I'll Matthew, have we started recording?
Yeah, everything's going.
Okay. All right, everyone. Welcome to the 12th CTGA Zoom meeting. Once again, my name is Jeff, and doing some background IT help here and there is Matthew. And we'll have some time for questions for a guest shortly. I'll start off first, and then later we'll have time for a little bit of chit chat. I did want to mention that I heard Bruce Allen's commentary on CKNW this morning, and he said he was at Stanley Park over the weekend. Now, you'll remember last week I told you I went a few days before, and it was Sunday afternoon around 4, and the traffic was okay. It was just stalled a little bit around Prospect Point, or rather the Prospect Point and the Tea House. But according to Bruce, he was there this last couple of days, and it was pretty bad news. I suspect it'll stay that way for the summer. And of course, there are no tour buses in the mix, nor does it seem like there will be. So again, I think it'll probably stay. Maybe we'll certainly ask Stephen his opinion on that shortly. Seems to me there was another little thing I was going to point out, but it doesn't matter. It'll come back in my head. Got my pen handy as always. So let's say good morning first to Stephen. Are you there with one of the best smiles in tourism?
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for the introduction.
Yeah, now give everyone the big smile.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, that's a wonderful smile. Well, first, Stephen, those hands are Trish. She keeps saying hello to me. Stephen, where were you born?
I was born in Vancouver.
Oh, fantastic.
St. Vincent's Hospital, which no longer exists, but...
yeah, that was the one up near Cambie and 33rd, right?
I believe so. I was pretty young at the time.
And what neighborhood were you raised in?
We moved around a little bit, Richmond, and then grew up, went to school and high school in North Burnaby.
Oh, okay. Fantastic. Did you know Squire Barnes? He was in Burnaby.
No. I'm the same graduating class as, who would you know, Cliff Ronning.
Oh, fantastic.
Hockey guy, yeah. We played lacrosse and a few sports together.
Fantastic. Well, how did, many of us do know you from the time you were at Tourism Vancouver, but after high school, did you do some postgraduate stuff? And how, like the rest of us, did you wind up in tourism?
Yeah, a little bit by accident, I guess. I finished a degree out of McGill University in biology, initially thinking I would go into sports medicine or something along those lines, but just didn't really have the focus and the energy to go on into that kind of field and that level of education. So I looked around. I actually spent a little bit of time in the environmental field, got a post-baccalaureate diploma in environmental science from what was just converted to Capilano University. And I guess, geez, I'm trying to remember the years in the 90s. And then I bumped into a gig with a Chamber of Commerce, Maple Ridge Chamber of Commerce, doing some stream keepers work and adopt-a-block work, and expanded that to Pitt Meadows and Mission, and kind of was involved in that nonprofit world. And then through just a phone call, and many of you may know that Chambers of Commerce offices operate as info centers. So people seeking, and if you were in an info center in Maple Ridge and I was covering somebody who was on a lunch break, if you had a question and you didn't know the answer, you picked up the phone and you phoned Tourism Vancouver and you talked to an information counselor. So when I picked up that phone that day, many of you may know, Jeff, you'll probably know Laura Serena. She was a media person for Tourism Vancouver many years ago.
Say the name again?
Laura Serena.
No, I don't know that name.
Okay. Well, Laura worked there. She also was a Burnaby North person, went to the same high school, a few years younger, and she was dating a friend of mine. So that was the connection to Tourism Vancouver. And she kept feeding me. She said, Steve, oh, Rick Anderson in pre-Olympics, and this is a great organization and you'd love it. So I applied for multiple jobs. I got multiple rejections until an opportunity in the membership department came up, account executive, and working at a chamber of commerce, a business association, and so there was enough connections there where finally the link was made, and into tourism I went and never looked back.
How long were you at Tourism Vancouver, and what department did you stay in, the one you went into?
Yeah, just over 10 years. Started in membership, transitioned to manager of visitor services. And then from there, when we first created the destination development position, which I loved, if I could have written my dream job description, it was probably that description. And that's more on the supply side of things. So working with the city and BIAs of the day on policies and projects on the supply side, not the demand side. So, do we have air access? And what about transportation routes? And what about product? And what about the expansion of the convention center? And working with the taxi industry and litter and street disorder and safe streets legislation, all of those kinds of things I was involved in and really enjoyed. And then an opportunity came to head up the provincial advocacy association. Jim Story was the chair at the time, and he knew me, and my resume came in, and I did that for a few years, and until we got into some, as you know, some rough areas pre-Olympics when both the HST decision. Remember that BC, Premier Campbell said we're not going to go to the HST, and then the election happened. He said yes, we're going to take the HST, and there was a little bit of a panic. And then 6 months before the Olympics, the province blew up Tourism BC as a crown corporation. So it sent a few shockwaves through the community, and all of this just months before the hosting the 2010 Olympics. So,
why?
I remember my father. Just to wrap up on that, I remember my father saying, "Smooth seas don't make for skillful sailors." And they definitely weren't smooth seas as we approached the Olympics and all of the behind the scenes work that was going on, both to host the Olympics, but also to resist all of those challenging decisions by the province.
What do you think, if you're able to sort of tell us a little bit more about that decision to stop tourism British Columbia from running? What was the thinking behind that? I mean, now it's morphed into Destination BC, but the name Tourism British Columbia had been around a fairly long time. All those names, Tourism Whistler, Tourism Vancouver, Tourism whoever, are good names. What was the thinking with stopping Tourism BC?
Jeff, I suspect some of your members might know some insights even more than I do. My sense is that Tourism BC was a really good organization, and they had a terrific model. They had a great CEO and a board, and it looked like they were going gangbusters. Just give me a second here. Somebody's trying
to tell President Trump you're busy.
Yeah, they were. Yeah, my father's not doing well these days, and he's in the hospital, so we're just monitoring some things.
Yeah, well, just so you know, my wife Trish has dementia. I've taken her out of the care home 3 months ago so that she wouldn't be confined to her room this whole time.
Good
and
for you.
So right now she's walking back and forth the hallway, one of her little exercises, until we go out for a walk every day. I live in False Creek South. That's the background you see behind me there.
Oh, nice.
So I know what looking after someone's all about. And it seems in the last few months, I've found out quite a few more people have had, one of the things with this COVID is that you have more time to talk with people or FaceTime or Zoom them. And I've discovered a few more people I've known for years. I didn't realize they had someone in their family. By the way, for the few of you who are listening in on this, who know Trish's sister, Delanor, she's been slowly coming down with early onset dementia as well. And last week, they finally were finally had to take her into a care. Well, actually, she's in hospital in Kamloops now, but she'll end up in a care facility. So unfortunately, as the media tells us, the numbers of dementia is growing. But anyway, Tourism British Columbia. Yeah.
Jeff, are your folks genuinely interested in that history? Is that?
Well, I just thought I'd ask a thumbnail sketch. Of course, I'm leading up to eventually. I didn't realize. Eventually, I'm going to let you talk about the West End BIA. I didn't realize till I was on your website that it only came along in 1999, and it's just kind of interesting how some BIAs have been around forever. It seems like the Gastown one seems like it's been around for 25 or 30 years. I didn't find out till recently Leonora Sally isn't there anymore.
That's right.
By the way, anyone who knows Stacy Klein with the Vancouver Lookout, if you've done any group bookings through Stacy and so on, apparently Stacy has left, and there's a new lady there whose name doesn't come to mind right off the top of my head, but if you need that information, I can get it for you. But anyway, yeah, I just thought I'd ask, because Tourism British Columbia was a great name, and why it got busted up always kind of astounded me.
I think it comes down to in control. Follow the money. They had leading up to the Olympics, what their budget would have been close to 70 million of relatively discretionary communication dollars. And you're the minister or the premier of the province of BC, and you're like, what do you mean I can't touch that? Or, we want them to do this or do that, or invest in a BC house, or there was always process. And you could understand if any one of your members was a minister of tourism, you got the land policy stuff, you got backcountry stuff and air access and, kind of tough files and nothing too glamorous. And right across the hall is Tourism BC doing global missions and marketing and, talking about all the great stuff there is in this province. So you might imagine there could be tension over the years around how a minister would like to be more in front and center, perhaps more. So I think that was part of the dynamics. And then pre-Olympics, as much as the Olympics were going to be a great thing for tourism, it just sort of brought that relationship to a boil, is my sense. And at one point, I guess the premier said, hey, you know what, we've had enough. We want that money to, to communicate the way we want to communicate pre-Olympics, and we'll invest in what we want to invest in pre-Olympics, and we don't want to go through a board of directors and an industry-led group and all of that stuff. We just and they control them. Now the difference, I'll segue to BIAs, the difference in the model, well, maybe via the Tourism Vancouvers of the world, the difference in the funding model is if the province took out Tourism BC, they kept all that money, because Tourism BC's was a formula funded association, but that formula, the money came to the province of BC. It was about, 1 or 1.5% of a hotel room tax. Now, Tourism Vancouver, Tourism Whistler, that money goes via the province to a city. So, theoretically, the province has some control over that, but the hotels have a lot to say about, if they want to be taxed in Vancouver or Whistler. So it's a bit more problematic. And then a BIA, our taxing is very similar. We have provincial enabled legislation that allows a municipality to create a levy area, not unlike Tourism Vancouver's hotel tax. So that money is collected. But in the case of a BIA or even Tourism Vancouver, if the province or the city was to take out a business improvement association and sort of the money would evaporate. That tax would no longer be collected. There's nothing to hold on to. Sadly, in the case of Tourism BC, that was the Achilles heel. If the province took out the Crown Corporation, they could keep the money.
I didn't realize that Tourism BC was a Crown Corporation. I didn't realize that. But so Tourism Destination came along a few years later. Somebody decided they needed to still promote the province.
Yeah, so Jeff, in both cases, both the HST decision, as you know, was reversed. Yeah. And the Tourism BC decision was essentially reversed. They didn't go all the way back to a formula-funded independent Crown Corporation. They kind of did a halfway move. So tourism or Destination BC is not managed by an industry-led board of directors who independently hire a CEO. I believe Martha is hired by the province directly. I believe she's considered a provincial employee.
Aha. All right. Well, I'll probably come back to that. I have another thing on that. But how long have you now been with the West End BIA? And just tell us a little bit about that.
Sure, just over 7 years. Business Improvement Associate. It's kind of the best of all worlds. It's sort of that destination development job, Jeff. You know, back to the days at Tours of Vancouver, where there's a fair number of things we do on the supply side, like, is the community safe? Is it clean? Does it have product? How do you help businesses with patios or other kinds of initiatives? And then there's a promotion piece, and in the West End, it's great because we have tourism in both English Bay and Stanley Park as kind of big drivers for that regional tourism. We have events. We have, the big ones, Pride, Celebration of Light. There's a car-free day. We've initiated a winter lighting. We've called it an event, but it's more placemaking. Some of you may have seen those lighting installations at English Bay in November and December. Last year we added a 27-foot grizzly bear down at English Bay, and there's Luna, the orca whale. So there's an event piece, there's a tourism piece with our hotels and our bike rentals and our restaurants. We do digital marketing and branding. So it's kind of a fun, interesting, dynamic environment. And the West End is big enough. We have enough businesses and enough assessed value that our budget is north of it's almost 900,000, depending on certain conditions and sponsorship and other things we do with the event. So we're kind of punching over $1 million, I would say, in sort of influence and partnerships.
And you're the big cheese boss, are you?
Well, I'm the chief water boy. I work for a board of directors, and I'm very lucky. It's refreshing to have a really good board of directors who want to govern and delegate appropriately. They monitor appropriately, and to be honest, the way the funding flows into a BIA is as a nonprofit, it's a pretty strong model, and you're not struggling to sell membership. So if you're in a chamber of commerce or a board of trade, you're always kind of what's the last great thing you did, and it's about trying to get credit for everything that comes across your desk, and you got to sell and hustle. BIAs, we work very hard, but we don't have to sell ourselves. So in some cases, we can allow others to get credit for things that we played a large hand in, but we don't need to sort of over puff up our chest, so to speak. We could just kind of do the good work. And if a board of trade or a chamber of commerce or some other group needs or wants to take more credit than perhaps they deserve, well, it's not as much pressure on us. So we get to do the fun stuff without having to do too much of the hard sell every year to, ask a business to cut a check for $500 or $600 or $10,000.
Well, if I was to open a small shop on Denman Street in the future, and I'm the owner, and maybe I have 1 or 2 employees, so there's a fee. If you want to join the BIA, there's a set fee based on.
It's automatic. The way the BIA model works is kind of like the Tours in Vancouver model. Once there's the majority, once a formula has reached a critical mass of support is reached, and there's criteria around that, then everybody's in. It's not optional. So even if you're like a Safeway on Lower Davie might say, we don't need a BIA, we're big enough, we do our own marketing, we have in-house security, we don't want to pay taxes. But if the majority of businesses in the catchment agree, then they're in. They have no ability to opt out.
Okay, by the way, I went into that new Safeway on Davie at Cardero about a week ago, and I was surprised. It's laid out very differently from your average Safeway, but hopefully it's working well. How I would imagine everyone was expecting a normal 2020, probably a pretty good year until COVID-19 came along. How are merchants along Davie, Denman, and Robson Street doing in general, in your opinion, so far?
Well, I mean, I would say it's a tale of two cities. It's, you know, the Safeways, the liquor stores, some of the pharmacies have had their best months, some of their best days ever. They have more share of plate. If you're looking at a grocery store, people are, you know, people repatriated. That 50,000 plus population of the West End is pretty much full because everybody had to come home from wherever they were, and they need to stay in place. So, you know, and they weren't going to restaurants. Lots of restaurants closed voluntarily or were open to very limited capacity. So, you know, those businesses were busy. Liquor stores, as you can appreciate, might have done some pretty good sales for wine and beer and other things as people hunkered down. But the bars in Davie Village, many of the restaurants, you know, closed. Hair salons closed, number of doctors' services, dental offices. So it was really hard on many businesses. I would say generally the West End probably as a business community fared better than most.
Yeah, because
So,
you've got a big population in that area.
well, but also, you know, we struggled for years, Jeff, thinking about, geez, how do we get more retail like West Fourth? Or what do we do? What, you know, the Robson BIA with Roots and formerly Lululemon and Destination Retail, even Gastown with Destination Retail and really high-end restaurants. We were like, how do we get better at that? And we just struggled. The Davie, Denman, Robson, Lower Robson just weren't attracting those kinds of businesses. And quite frankly, the local population could go, you know, within walking distance or a short commute, and you're at downtown and you're at all the destination retail you wanted. As it turns out, in a pandemic crisis, it's a good thing not to be over reliant on destination retail. The Robson BIA, the 3 blocks between Jervis and Burrard, their vacancy rate, they were like 80 or 90% closed. You saw them boarding up their stores. Gastown, you saw them boarding up stores in Gastown and other areas. The West End on Denman Street in the middle of April, you would hardly know there's a pandemic. You know, people were out and about. They were going to coffee shops. The locals were in the area. They wanted to get out. They wanted to get a coffee. They were going to the grocery store. It hardly seemed like there was a pandemic.
Yeah, well, I have to say, you know, I grew up in the West End, and I come down there probably every week or second week. We go for a walk along English Bay Beach and often along Denman and so on. And yeah, but I would have to say that with the news out of the United States last week, with COVID-19 being up a big increase in 41 of the 50 states, I think a lot of the rest, you know, it's obvious the border isn't going to open anytime soon. It's supposed to open at the end of July, but I think it'll be extended. I think a lot of restaurants are finally realizing, oh my God, we really, whether they knew it or not, because not every waiter would ask the guests, oh, are you locals? Are you visiting? You know, pretty clearly, I think they're waking up to the fact of how important the border being open, the international visitors, the cruise ships brought them just tons and tons of businesses. Because a lot of Canadians, even in their own city, they'll eat out once in a while, something simple maybe, but you know, a restaurant like the Italian Kitchen and a few others, you know, they don't go in there all the time. And have you heard some of the restaurants saying, wow, we're really going to be just barely making it? I mean, what are you hearing from the restaurants? Well, again, that Davie and Denman area, you've got a big draw. People want to go down English Bay Beach, whether they're West End residents or they're from Kitsilano or whatever. But I'm worried about a lot of restaurant store owners. And of course, the bus companies are, you know, wow, there's a lot of parked buses. The insurance plates have been pulled off, and, you know, you hardly see a tour bus on the streets at all anymore.
I think some of our challenges on the tourism side predated COVID. You may remember, I'm not sure how many of your members here, Jeff, were aware that we went through a West End community plan back in 2012 and 13, and it changed some of the zoning, some of the density. And then, some of the fallout of that was the Empire Landmark came down.
Yeah.
That's a big deal. That was a lot of people who were flowing down Robson Street and onto Denman. Around the same time, the Coast Hotel no longer was providing service down at the Coast Plaza. The owner of that property decided to convert it back mainly to a residential building. It had always been partially residential. So you had two major hotels pre-COVID that really sent a shockwave tourism-wise down Robson and Denman and English Bay. So, you know, businesses, it's a dynamic model because the success of a business has as much to do with your ability to negotiate a good rent lease arrangement as it does from, you know, marketing to tourism. If you've got a really high rent and you took a gamble on tourism and hotels closed, and then God forbid you ran into the pandemic, you know, how do you survive that? It's pretty tough. But I would say, Jeff, it's interesting, again, the survivability of some of those. I'm amazed at how some of the restaurants on Denman survive. Even during good times, they're so small.
Yeah.
They have very, very small commercial units, and you just wonder. I think in a lot of cases, they were already kind of, you know, selling takeout, you know, and delivery out the back door, and you know, they kind of, you know, managed through, and they kind of soldier on. There was a fair amount of turnover. Some businesses did speculate on tourism and lost. They kind of looked at the street in July and August and thought, this is a great street. But, you know, November, December, January, it's a tough street if tourism is your business.
I do have a question about the Denman Place Hotel, the Old Coast. Of course, that building originally opened as in 1968, if I recall, and it was an apartment building, right. And then it became a hotel. And I've forgotten the new name. Apparently, it's going to become a boat. Apparently, the renovation of the tower includes a bit of a boutique hotel and condos for sale. Is that right?
I believe so. The boutique hotel. There's a new hotel model out there. Maybe some of your members have heard of it, called Sonder. Has anybody heard of it? Raise your hand if you've heard of this model, Sonder.
I've only heard of that because I went down there. There's a desk at the Denman Place Mall about the supposed sales, and I heard them saying Sonder, but I'd never. What can you tell us about them?
So what Sonder is, it's basically it's a technology company, not like an Uber or something like that. What they will do is they'll go into a residential building or you know, some other situation, and they will lease. They aim for a minimum of kind of 40 or 50 units. So they'll lease 3 or 4 floors of a building, and it could be a commercial building, an office building, it could be a renovated building. And what you do is you download an app, and you do all your bookings based on the application. So you kind of source out what city do you want to be in: Montreal, San Antonio, Vancouver. What's the inventory? What's the room? What's the price? And you make all the arrangements. When you arrive, you get a code on your cell phone, part of your app, and you enter the code on the door. There's no front desk. There's no people to greet you there, but they will provide, you know, daily if needed, or at the end of your stay, some linen and cleaning service, and you pay for that. But essentially, you could never see anybody associated with a hotel. You're kind of living sort of like B&B, or maybe not an Airbnb, but you're kind of interacting a little bit more like a local. You have your own passcode, and you know, if you need some help in the unit or you've run out of toilet paper, you just use the app and you call service, and they'll send somebody to stock up. In some cases, they have supplies at a kind of lobby area. There might be a locker, or there might be some supplies. Again, depending if they've got a piece of a property, like in the case of the Coast, they'll have maybe 2 or 3 floors, or if they've found a small building and they've purchased or rented the entire building and they lease out everything. So it's interesting. I think the hotel staff unions aren't crazy about, you know, a lot of union jobs are not supported through this, but they hire marketing people and they hire cleaners, and they do it from a centralized. So in Vancouver, I imagine the model would be they'll have a warehouse or some centralized location, maybe in False Creek Flats, the light industrial area, and then they will service. We have another property. You know where the community garden is on Davie and Burrard, beside St. Paul's Hospital? So that'll be a development. That'll be a tower. It'll have 3 stories as a podium with office and retail on the bottom. And then it'll be a bunch of condos above. I think they've got the ability for maybe 2 or 3, maybe 4 floors could be leased out to Sonder. And then, so there would be a boutique hotel at Davie and Burrard.
The community garden, that comes as a result of it being a former gas station, and they have to let the land sit for a number of years, and then they can build what they want on it. Is that how those come about?
I wouldn't say build as you want, Jeff. This is the city of Vancouver.
Oh, yeah.
There are a lot of restrictions. There's view cones from, I guess it's the Granville Street Bridge right over St. Paul's Hospital. So buildings can't block certain view cones. So you've got to sort of twist and thin and do different things to be on that property. And the city also is looking for what's called community amenity contributions. So they're looking for daycare, the developer to provide daycare or to provide, cash to support the arts community, or they're looking for office space for cultural, for nonprofit cultural groups. So the city comes and the market has changed, as you may know, with different policies provincially and speculation taxes and, the pandemic, et cetera. The city's still looking to maximize its dollars off of the developers. So we're hopeful that project will move along in the near future, but it's gonna be a community garden for at least this summer and possibly into next.
Well, it's prettier to look at, that's for sure. And your thoughts on what, when people think of St. Paul's Hospital and knowing that it's going to move to the False Creek Flats just north of the Pacific Central Station, there's 2 buildings there at the existing St. Paul's, the original older structure and the newer wing that was added 25 or 30 years ago. I'm speculating that the newer building will probably end up still being some kind of a medical building. At least that's my thinking. But the old building, Stephen, from what I've seen of footage on TV, it looks so far gone on the interior. It would just cost a fortune to renovate it once St. Paul's moves out of there. What do you see as happening to the old building and the new building when eventually the new structure is finished years from now?
I don't know for sure, Jeff, but what I think will happen is that the old building, at least the facade or some portion of it, will be maintained or kept or sort of utilized to signal there was a heritage site, but the rest of the place is going to be leveled. And a developer is going to go in and they're going to have to maximize the opportunity on that space. Like I said, they've got to deal with these view cones. So, you can't just go straight up and do density the way you want. You've got to thin buildings and twist them so that certain conditions are met. But I think given the sale price, Providence would have had to sell that property for as much as humanly possible in order to facilitate the purchase and the development on the new site, even though the province is going to provide hundreds of millions of dollars for the new St. Paul's location. You still need the close to $1 billion coming off of that St. Paul's site at Comox and Davie, or Comox and Burrard. So I think a new developer goes in and they get as much density as they can on that space, and there may be a few bricks of the facade that remain, but I wouldn't expect much more than that. And they may place a very like some sort of emergency or some sort of outpatient kind of services, because I know the West End seniors had really relied on that hospital as a close, walking or very, very close taxi ride. False Creek Flats is going to be a little bit more of a jog for people to get to. So I think there was some talk of either ambulatory or some other level of service remaining on the site, probably as part of the kind of the retail mix, commercial mix that would be service mix on the podium or podiums. I suspect they may get 2 or 3 towers on that site.
So the new building is likely to come down as well.
100%, 100%. That they're gonna, it's gonna get raised, Jeff. It's gonna go right down to. Now, I think in terms of a BIA or think about Davie Village and others, we see it as probably a net loss. We're going to gain a bunch of residents who will live in proximity to Davie Village and Denman and Robson, and they'll be able to provide, get services at those locations. But, how do you replace a hospital with all the doctors' offices and all the visitors who come in because they have family members and they go for lunch and they buy flowers and they're at the pharmacy? And, it was a pretty dynamic. Davie Village, the West End, kind of grew up with St. Paul's, and it'll be a bit of a shock when that goes. So as a BIA, we've been working very hard, and this connects to COVID, trying to create a patio zone and kind of enhance Davie Village in particular, but also Denman and Robson, really make them great destinations where people want to be. And it's been hard. It's a struggle with the city, and it's not just the city, it's the province. And you may think, well, it's pretty easy to set up a patio, or why can't we have more patios? And just, there's so many restrictions on bathrooms and fire and load, and bathrooms alone, we could talk a half an hour on why bathrooms and the ratio between bathrooms and seats is so important, but it really limits what businesses can do. And to totally gut a restaurant or a bar and put in more, so it's
yeah.
We're in the long haul.
I was going to mention bathrooms as well, because what I've discovered with the situation with my wife is I noticed this more. My wife's had early onset dementia 4 or 5 years now, but 2 years ago I was able to still take her on a few vacations, short ones to Hawaii and see family in the interior. But 2 years ago we got to Australia. And one of the first things, and I've been there before, but what I noticed on this trip 2 years ago, and we were there 6 weeks in various parts of the country, just about everywhere you go, restaurant, department store, movie theater, just about everywhere you go, there's a men's, a ladies, and a handicapped, or if you will, a family room. I need to be able to take her with me so I can use the washroom. And if I need to help her, I can't go into the men's, I can't take her into the women's, and so on. And once back here, I noticed, wow, if it's a newer structure, they've got probably a family room or something, but you're just about dead otherwise. You're just got men, women, no other choice. And with COVID, we need to have more hand washing stations, just somewhere, even like at English Bay Beach or anywhere. You can run across a sink with a couple of taps and you turn it on, get some water, you can wash your hands and carry on. That's kind of a thing that needs to be thought out as well. I had a comment about, well, anyway, I'll just, any thoughts on that with washrooms?
Oh, just, it's not one of the more glamorous supply side things that a BIA worries about. Tourism Vancouver doesn't have to worry that much about it, but that's kind of the nitty gritty that a BIA, it's like, where are the washrooms? And COVID sort of uncovered that a lot of the capacity in communities are provided by frontline businesses. Whether you're a Starbucks or a restaurant, I mean, these businesses provide a lot of the services for those who are homeless or in need of some kind of support. And I think the city does recognize it, but maybe not everyone does, that when all those businesses, or many of them, closed or limited their hours of operation, the laneways around the West End and around the downtown became bathrooms. People started going to the bathroom all over our laneways. It was just a bloody mess, and not something we were really pleased with. And we've been advocating for years out of the West End plan I'm not sure if many of your members know, Jeff, but in the West End, the laneways are about a third wider than the normal city laneways.
How did that come? How did that come to be? I mean, I grew up in the West End, and I do notice that they're wider than you see in other.
You know what? It's a good question. I'm not sure. It may have been just the way the West End was laid out. As you know, when you get to Burrard Street, if you go down Hastings, let's say you're coming downtown towards Burrard Street, and you're using Hastings. So you've come just north of or just south of Gastown. You notice how the street grid shifts? It kind of goes on an angle. You run into the Marine Building, and then everything angles.
Yeah.
Well, the whole West End was kind of zoned and laid out and gridded with a slightly different formula than the rest of the downtown. We ended up with really extra long blocks. So the blocks between Burrard and Thurlow to Butte are much longer than the normal city blocks downtown. In addition to that, they were at a bit of an angle, and then the laneways themselves were wider. So I think it was all part of a package, Jeff, that just happened to be an artifact of the early, 3 greenhorns and, the purchase and the development of that early days, the area. But they're now all named, and it's a shame because some of them are just like those laneways are really, how lots of the locals navigate. They walk, they use them all the time. They're quite popular for now takeout and delivery, but the condition is terrible. Not only are they used as bathrooms often, it's changing a little bit now with reopening, but the condition with potholes and just the general abuse and decline, I mean, it's a shame. We think those laneways in some destinations, take an extreme like Quebec City, around the old city, and how they've, their lanes are just like their destinations. It's where artisans show their wares and people travel. In our lanes, we still really haven't figured out, what their potential is, other than, bathrooms and garbage removal and,
Well, one of the nicest laneways is the Mole Hill, Comox, between Comox and Pendrell and Butte and Thurlow. That laneway is almost like walking down a garden.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah. So I just want to back up for a second. Someone asked if I could ask you, what is the BIA's position on the whole hospital thingy moving? I mean, downtown with 60,000 or so residents, and the West End with about 50,000. The ambulances aren't going to be as downtown anymore. It's if they need to leave the West End to get to the new location for St. Paul's. What does the BIA think on any and all of that? And should there be a replacement, smaller medical something or other that's handy in the downtown West End, maybe somewhere along Burrard Street? Or
well, that is the plan, Jeff, that there would be some kind of facility left on site as part of the services and the redevelopment. What that looks like, is it an ambulatory? Is it, I'm not quite sure what that would look like. We were against the move, and selfishly, all those doctors' offices, all those visitors, all those, it's kind of interwoven in the fabric of the West End. We'll lose a lot of jobs, people that were there 24. Part of Davie Village being an entertainment district and 24-hour kind of destination is that St. Paul's is a 24-hour facility. So when you lose that, you'll lose, I think, some of the vibrancy. We'll gain residents next door, but will that offset the loss of the more dynamic kind of employee base and the visitors of those in the hospital? Imagine this, Jeff. You put your hospital, you take it from the highest point in the downtown on solid rock, and you move it to the lowest point of the downtown on a landfill that will liquefy in an earthquake. But I guess you can put the pilings down and you can figure it out. But if they wanted to stay in that location, the community garden site that we talked about, they could have bought that property. Why Providence didn't buy that property, and then that would have been an expansion opportunity, a new tower, a new facility. They just didn't want to. They were you know, they kind of ran that, my opinion is they just ran that facility to the ground. They had made up their mind they wanted to leave, and they just ran it to the ground until others looked at it and said, you're right, this can't be salvaged.
Yeah, and we've seen that before in a few instances of older buildings in the city. And you know what? I'm going to ask you about that in regards to the old Empire Landmark. Some people say that the owners who bought the place years ago, I don't know, 10 years ago or whatever, they kind of wanted to sell it so they could get 2 new towers up on that site, and they let the old landmark run down. Now, I don't know if you have any insight on that, or do you have any opinion on what happened to the landmark?
I don't know. I mean, you know, it was also built, Jeff, I believe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was built as a residential building. I'm not sure if it was built as a hotel from the
No,
get-go.
it did. It opened in '73 as a hotel.
As a hotel, okay, yeah, thank you.
And I maintain if they hadn't have sat that tower in the middle of the block, if it had been at one end or the other, it would still be here today. But sitting right in the middle, it stops the ability to have 2 towers on it.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it's a function of zoning and density that's allowed on a site. So that gets a little bit technical on the development side. But I think when they looked at the shell of that building, not unlike the coast, you know, at some point you have to do a renovation. And I think what they found is that they would have to renovate, they'd have to put a lot of money kind of behind the walls in plumbing, in electrical, you know, things that guests don't really want to pay a lot for. You know, guests will pay more for the new carpet, the new beds, the new, you know, maybe window glazing, the new things that they can feel and touch, the new amenities in the bathroom might be attractive and you know, but if you've got to spend tens of millions of dollars in things that are behind the wall, like plumbing and electrical, I think that's in part what they were facing, is just an aging building, and they'd have to put in a lot of money. And then, as I said, the West End plan came along, and the city, through the West End plan, realized that, you know, we need more housing supply for locals, and we need social housing, and that started to drive a lot of the decisions. And I think that hotel, that land, as you said, Jeff, you know, when an owner of the property sort of looked at the West End plan and did the numbers, and they went, gosh, we could do 2 buildings here. Now, of course, they were doing that math pre-pandemic. They were doing that math, you know, before the, you know, all the restrictions on speculation and other taxing issues. So, you know, we'll see how successful that is in the end. But yeah, they're gonna put 2 towers, and I think it was just the math of, do you redevelop, put in 2 towers, or do you sink a bunch of money behind the walls in an older building, and you're still not going to get much more for the rooms?
Yeah, and that's why the old Portman Bridge came down. They didn't want to build a brand new bridge by an old bridge and still have to maintain the old bridge. They said you should just build one brand new bridge. Okay, I got a question for you. Right across the street from the old Empire Landmark on the corner of Broughton and Robson, I think it would be considered the northwest corner. It's been an empty lot on that corner with a beautiful tree growing out of it for probably 40 or 50 years. What's the story with that old lot there? I remember there was a small 3-story-ish wooden building. It was a little confectionery. It may have been a Chinese confectionery that was right on the corner. And then one day it closed, the building came down, and that lot's been empty ever since. Do you know more about that story?
You know, I wouldn't be the authority. It's private property. So, you know, we don't necessarily have a window into, you know, the books, the accounting, the investment. You know, I don't know where it's nested in the owner's investment portfolio. My guess is that the property owner has a large portfolio, that it's probably a large net worth family or organization. And that, you know, taking a loss on that property might be offset. There might be some tax advantages in other parts of a portfolio. That's my only guess, because the property taxes on that site would be very high. You know, they'd be, and with the West End Community Plan, just like the Empire Landmark, able to have more density, then the value of that property for the Empire Landmark, the value of that property went up. The same would be true for that that location, Jeff, I imagine its property since 2016 to just pre-COVID would have tripled.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so tell us a little bit about the West End plan, which is listed on your website. Just a sort of a mention without tapping on it, but I didn't tap on it. But the West End plan came out just a few years ago. And what does that mean, the West End plan?
Well, it came out the end of 2013. In 2014, probably January, February 2014, the zoning. It's all about zoning. You know, when you look at these plans, you really have to kind of look deeper into the zoning. So any of you who've been down to Lower Davie in the last, 6 months, year, have seen the development there. You mentioned the new Safeway.
Yeah.
All of that was the result of the West End plan, upzoning that area. Similarly, with the Empire Landmark, Lower Robson was basically upzoned. So allowing more density, more height and more density. That was in part to preserve Denman Street was effectively downzoned. Davie Village was effectively downzoned. You used to, 6 years ago, you could have put a mixed use building on Denman Street, 5 or 6 stories, residential above commercial. You can't do that today.
Why?
Because they downzoned it, they restricted it. They said you can only have up to 2, maybe 3 stories commercial retail on Denman Street. And they used the idea of the notion of a village. So the V is a very important part of that village. And what they think about is that the density, the higher buildings would be outside, and you'd come to a valley. So as you get to Davie Village, or what they want to recall Denman Village, which would be between Davie Street and Robson, the 2 blocks, small blocks between Robson and Georgia their height is increased. So that's why you don't see Chowbella, for example, on the corner. That's going to be redeveloped, that site. But basically that village means valley, and they wanted the lower rise to allow sun to penetrate to the sidewalk. They didn't want the conflict with residents living above a restaurant or a bar or a pub who would say, why is it so noisy, and get off my street and not in my backyard. And so they were trying to mitigate some of those tensions. We generally supported it, but the trade-off was supposed to be that the city was going to work with the BIA to really help those businesses in Davie Village and Denman Village to succeed. To, maybe it's patio extensions in the laneways. Maybe the city put a few $1 million. Denman's an interesting street. I think most of your members would know that the laneways are perpendicular to Denman, not parallel. So the laneways of Davie Street and Robson run behind the businesses in parallel to the commercial street. On Denman, there are no parallel lanes. They're perpendicular, which creates a bit of an eyesore if you've got a bin and grease and garbage that you can see. So we're not crazy about that condition, but it does create an opportunity. And the city's just they're a bit slow to kind of put the bucks into Denman Street and kind of refresh it. But that's what essentially the big moves were: upzoning in certain areas and downzoning in others. The same was true, Jeff, for residential. Your members may appreciate that the West End, if you lived west of Denman, you had the park view. If you lived south of Davie, you had the ocean sunset beach view. If you were in the Nelson Plateau area, you were sort of central between Denman and Robson. You had this tree-lined, beautiful streets. And so in order to not add any density west of Denman, because it's already pretty dense, and the neighborhood wasn't looking for more big towers, or south of Davie, or in the Nelson Plateau, what the city did is they what's called a picture frame. So if you imagine Burrard Street and Georgia as being the outer edges of the West End, on those edges, and then the other edge is Stanley Park and the seawall and Sunset Beach. But basically it's Burrard and Georgia that defines the West End. The Burrard and Thurlow corridor, so between Thurlow and Burrard, where the hospital is, Jeff, that was upzoned. So that's why the hospital play became a play, is because the city allowed more density in that zone, more height and more density. Also, Georgia Alberni became the other edge of the picture frame. So between Alberni and Georgia, if you had a property there, it was upzoned. So that's where you see things like the old White Spot and the old gas station. The zoning, which allowed height and density, basically tripled the value of those properties. You add in speculation and some other things. I mean, you could add a property that was valued in 2015, 2014 at, you know, call it 20 million. You know, that went to 120 million in 4 years.
Amazing. Someone's asked on the chat about the bathhouses at English Bay Beach. Is there supposed to be any kind of a rebuild or redo on those?
We're in the early stages. I think COVID sort of threw a monkey wrench into this. There is a city planning process for English Bay, the waterfront, which would include sort of thinking about Morton Park, where the amazing laughter is, and, you know, Denman Street, Morton Street, that street connection. It would include bathhouse and, you know, upgrades, what it needs. It'll go all the way to the aquatic center at the bridge to the edge of Stanley Park. And so I'm not sure. They haven't really come out with, you know, aggressive engagement with the community, but it's a process that pre-COVID was starting. At the same time, Jeff, the high school and community center and library, Joe Fortes, is also earmarked for a planning process. So, you know, we saw both of these as a catalyst to sort of rethinking Denman Street, Lower Davie, and both the pandemic and the city's citywide planning process that was announced a year and a half ago, kind of throwing a little bit of uncertainty into, well, what exactly is going to happen? Is there any money for a new high school rebuild? Is there any money for the community center? You know, if they redesign the bathhouse, does anybody have any money post-pandemic to do anything meaningful? Those are open questions in my mind. We're going to have a federal and provincial government who are going to come out of this with a massive hangover. And where's the money to do all of these projects? I'm not sure.
Do any of the members have a question you want to ask, or do if you want to type it in the chat, go ahead there. We've been very graciously Stephen, we've had you now for just an hour. That is fantastic. One person wrote that apparently that old building at Broughton and Robson is owned by a Hong Kong fellow. I'm just trying to find it on the screen here. A Hong Kong businessman, and he pays his tax bills every year, and that's about as much as I can get on that. Says he got the information from a realtor years ago. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so just adding into that, Jeff, there is a link in the chat for that particular property. More specifically, it is a Hong Kong-based developer, and that runs it. There's a local law firm that takes care of everything in regards to it, and you know, they don't ask for, they don't respond to any comments and all that. But it is maintained. Obviously, the taxes are paid. But you know, you can see somebody cleans up the garbage and you know, takes care of the grass, that sort of thing on it. But it's just sitting there.
I was just answering a question for someone who asked about the, they want your opinion, Stephen, on the chandelier. But I know the chandelier is just outside of Burrard Street. It's in the downtown area, actually, right under the Granville Bridge. But that whole Vancouver House project is an amazing thing. All those three new triangular buildings there at Pacific and Howe and Pacific and Granville. Any thoughts on that whole complex? Is that something you'd like to see happen somewhere else along Robson?
Yeah, well, I guess that's two questions, Jeff. One is the project itself, the design, the architecture, the density. It's interesting to have those, those buildings. It was a triangular lot that they had to figure out how to maximize the potential on. So it kind of twisted and became a rectangle as it grew and got skyward. In terms of, there is a connection to the West End directly and indirectly through the Chandelier. Directly, when that project landed, there was a $7 million community amenity contribution, and that's in part how they built the Jim Diva Plaza. A few $1 million went into the West End and to the Davie Village areas, kind of one of the first areas to see a little bit of a refresh as a result of the West End Community Plan. So while the big moves in a community plan are zoning and the big buildings and the big moves, the little stuff is in placemaking. It's in plazas, it's in, street furniture, it's in lighting, it's in those kinds of things. I'm not sure how many of your members, Jeff, the city, I believe it was June 9th, thereabouts, the city received a report from staff, and it's related to the downtown public space strategy. If you go to the city website, you Google downtown public space strategy, you'll come up with I think it's like a 70-page plan. And that gets into some of the details about public life in the downtown, excluding Gastown and Chinatown, but basically covering the Yaletown, West End, Central Business District, the Robson BIA, Cole Harbor. Kind of looks at all that space and says, what could public life be like? What are some of the moves the city could make? One of the things we've been advocating for, and your members may, be interested in this, is, what is Vancouver in the November to, February, March window? We kind of, Tourism Vancouver and others, it's sunny skies and beautiful scenery in July and August, patio umbrellas, but that's not Vancouver totally. As any of us know, Vancouver is about rain and clouds and how do we embrace the real essence of Vancouver, which is kind of defined by that November sort of, it's cloudy, it's rainy, what do we do? And so for years we've been pushing on this idea. We've used the vehicle called Lumiere Vancouver, but we could change the name. But it was really just a vehicle to rethink that sort of, November to March window. And could we add public art and lighting and activation and programming that could benefit tourism, and when I say tourism, mainly to benefit initially locals, where locals would love it. They'd have an extra place to see. It'd be interesting to live or visit the area because it's got beautiful artistic lighting or interactive things or other programming elements. So we, as the West End BIA, we took the lead on that for the city, or at least for the downtown, and said, let's cathedral think, Jeff. Let's think about this. If we were doing this for over 20, 25 years and we were consistent in our effort, where might we arrive? So we think the Chandelier could be part of a network of interesting places and spaces downtown. English Bay with all of those lighting features like the grizzly bear and Luna the whale and the tree. Jim Diva Plaza in Davie Village could be very kind of pride and queer colors and disco balls. 800 block Robson is being built out as we speak. There's going to be another plaza at Robson and Butte, part of the Robson BIA catchment area. If we included seawalls and bridges and waterways and Lower Lonsdale eventually and Granville Island, November to March could be some of the best time to be a Vancouverite. And if it's a great time to be a Vancouverite to explore the downtown, it maybe could lead to some demand for hotels and tourism products. So that was always our vision for that, Jeff. And if your group is interested in more, it's the city, Tourism Vancouver, the hotels, some of them haven't really kind of, it's hard to make it a priority, right? when the pandemic hit, a lot of people pulled back on that vision temporarily, but it'd be a shame to lose it altogether.
I've always been surprised that tourism, the BIAs, or in particular Tourism Vancouver or now Destination BC, doesn't do a better job of trying to, tourists, you know, when I was working all the time, not this year, tourists from almost anywhere, whether it's United States, even Eastern Canada, but particularly folks from the US and Europe and so on, they go, really? You, Vancouver and Victoria, the only two parts of Canada that don't go through a more commonly thought of Canadian winter? No, it's kind of cloudy. You might get some cloudy days, you get some sunny days, but we get little or no snow. You know, you should still come back and see us at that time of the year if the opportunity exists. Because yeah, you're not gonna have to walk through, we're not minus 40 and we're not in a lot of snow. And that's never really been promoted, in my opinion. We probably could see more visitors. The people in Seattle seem to know, and Portland, but we don't get enough of them coming up in the wintertime, and certainly not this past winter. Anyway, anyone else have any questions or anything they want to, someone just put something on the chat there. Someone wrote, building infrastructure brought us out of the Depression. I think the same needs to be considered post-COVID restoration.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I would tend to agree with that. And I think it's, you know, what are the incentives that will be put in place by, you know, federal, provincial governments for that kind of work? So, you know, developers, it's a different world trying to develop a private project, you know, especially if it's a residential component to it. And then look at, you know, Charles Gauthier and the downtown BIA. I mean, you know, if this work from home sticks in even a modest percentage of it, you know, you got a lot of office buildings that, you know, might not see their full vacancy. So office values, you know, those commercial buildings, there could be some knock-on effects, at least in the short, medium term, that could, you know, make it challenging to invest in new buildings, new commercial office buildings.
Okay, I got two questions just came up, or one was mine. A brief background, if you know, the idea of naming the laneways that we spoke about. Many of them now have a street sign, a black and white street sign, saying the name, and sometimes there's a little sentence below it, trying to briefly explain why it's called that or who that person was. Did you guys have something to do with that, the naming of the laneways?
No, not directly. The city has a naming, you know, process and a naming panel and committee. So I think it was probably out of the West End community plan. There was a recognition that the laneways were extra wide. Again, back to zoning, you were allowed to build out on the laneways in the West End. You can put laneway housing or multi-story developments on those laneways. They also tried to incentivize some of the residential buildings that fronted, say, a Burnaby Street or a Haro Street. If you took away their parking space or you redeveloped some of that surface parking, could you build a 2, 3, 4-story, you know, mini condo or townhouse complex? So when you have houses on the laneways, it sort of made sense that you want to name them something so they have an address. So I think that was part of it. And then they looked at, you know, who were the significant advocates, seniors advocates, or people that were involved in different movements or, you know, made different contributions. So we think there's a real opportunity. As those laneways come into Denman Street, you know, what if you refreshed all of those connection points, allowed for some patios and other commercial activity, and then did murals and other public art and told the story of these, you know, significant people and told the story of the West End through murals. And so, you know, these are multi-year, kind of 10-year visions, but that's part of why the laneways are named.
Somebody asked about patios. I have noticed already on Robson Street, an additional, some of the curb lane has been taken up by more than one restaurateur with space for a patio. Will we see more of that along Denman and or on Davie? Denman's a tricky one, right? Because sometimes,
Hey, Jeff, so we do a fair amount of advocacy as an organization, as you could imagine, with the city and plans and zoning and various things.
Yeah.
Does your group get involved in advocacy? Do you think about issues and policy and write letters, or is that just beyond your capabilities or capacity?
Well, I know that some of our people do as individuals, not as the Tour Guide Association per se. However, with the COVID outbreak, that people have had more time to advocate more and more, such as opening Stanley Park to 2 lanes, not one. And certainly, if you wanted to send us. We have a couple of email addresses where you can reach myself and others and say, hey, this is where we're coming along and thinking about something. If you guys would like to have a discussion on that and tell us your thoughts, we're open to we're open to thoughts and suggestions about things that perhaps we should be interested in. Marlene, our president, is on the call today, and I'm not sure if she or anyone wants to talk on that. Go ahead. Just sorry, I asked you a question about the patios on Robson.
Well, let's let Marlene chime in if that's okay.
Just very quickly, Jeff pretty well answered it, that it's on an individual basis. The whole Stanley Park issue, we posted on our Facebook. So our Facebook page is fairly new, and I think that's where anything would go, is information there. And we kind of ran into a dichotomy of opinions. So the board, as this is all really new to us, decided that if we are going to present one side, that we have to make sure that there's the other side represented as well. So we'll just see how it goes with the advocacy. I hope that answers, Stephen.
Yes, yeah. Advocacy is very difficult. Policy is very difficult to do. Some organizations are set up for it, like the BC Chamber of Commerce. It's kind of, and they have big policy conventions and they debate there's a huge, process behind it. Canadian Federation of Independent Business, they just kind of survey their members and they pop out a response rate and then they send out a news release. That's how they advocate. So there's different ways to do it. The reason why I ask is your group may be familiar with and interested in Denman Street, both as a transportation corridor, but also a destination in itself where you can go to a restaurant or a patio or get services. We are not going to, you may be familiar that the east side of Denman, and I don't have too much more time here, Jeff, but the east side of Denman, the city basically strips parking. I believe it's 7 days a week from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. to allow traffic to flow. In part, that would have been tourism and buses and other things. But we think there's a fair amount of traffic that's kind of, North Vancouver to the west side of Vancouver going to, just traveling through. It seems like it serves a purpose for the city's transport and the regional transportation network to take some pressure off of Burrard Street and Georgia Street. And it's like, so during the pandemic, when all these patio opportunities and the restaurants were forced to, either close or limit their capacity, the city's got a policy where you could allow patio extensions into the curb lane. But if your curb lane doesn't have permanent parking, which could then be stripped and a patio put in its place, if that curb lane is largely used for transportation, buses and cars, then you're stuck. You have nowhere to go. You're a business. You're landlocked. Too bad. So sad. We've been fighting that policy given the reduction in transit usage during the pandemic and the kind of crisis that small businesses were facing. We said, what if you could change that regulation on Denman Street? What it's called, the regulation is called a rush hour regulation. So the rush hour regulation strips parking. So during a rush hour, so on Denman Street, they defined the northbound rush hour to be basically every day of the week from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m.
Right.
So we were asking for that policy to be revisited. The city was willing to revisit it to on a couple of test blocks, but they didn't want to reinstate parking and then allow those parking spaces where there was demand to be reallocated for a patio. They basically wanted to put construction barriers along that curb lane, say between Pendrell. I'm assuming your membership knows Vancouver, Denman, so between Pendrell and Comox, Comox being the border of the Denman Place Mall and the Coast Plaza Hotel. That's that new bike route that about 5 years ago got put in. They poured concrete and they restricted the right-hand turn. The hotel hated it, taxis hated it, but there it is, they poured concrete. So they were thinking they could test that block, but rather than just simply allowing parking to be there all day, and if there was a business or two who wanted to use it, we would gain from parking, which we know businesses need, especially in a pandemic when people aren't taking the bus as much and they're kind of using the car a little bit more. We need more parking. And then if there was demand, if there was a restaurant who could, they would then take the, 1 or 2 parking stalls, typically 2 parking meter stalls, and create a patio. And we thought, let's try that. It's a pandemic. Give us a break, help out. And the city, rather than bringing the parking back, they wanted to build out this. And we were like, at 6 p.m., you'll know this, most of you, if you've been down there, at 6 p.m., when that parking regulation changes and you can park on Denman, super popular. I mean, those parking spots are a premium. They really help English Bay. They help businesses and patios. And I think it's actually, I'm not even sure, but it might even be free parking at that point in those spots. So they're coveted. So the city wanted us to basically, we lost parking between 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. They wanted us to go a full 20 hours without any parking. And we're like, oh, for God's sake, and all of your members, you would know, if you go down to Denman or almost any commercial street, it's really on a block by block basis. It really matters what businesses are there. Are they takeout? Are they delivery? Are they service? You really need to think about those blocks. And in the case of Denman, they're actually half blocks, because you go from Pendrell to an extra wide lane, which is now named, and then you go to Comox. So you have this chopped area, and it's fascinating. It's got lots of potential. We were hoping to do something really special on Denman, but the city engineering department just, with TransLink's they're a big deal in this city, and especially on a street like Denman and others, they carry a lot of influence, and for good reason, because people take the bus and they want to get around. But between parking and maybe an advocacy group on accessibility, if
So Stephen, have you put together some sort of a proposal? Is there something that we could put in our Facebook page with a link leading to that? Is there something you've got?
But my only challenge, Marlene, is that we kind of need to get to yes on these things, and we're not really looking for another association that'll muddy the water. That'll go, on the one hand, this would be lovely for the España restaurant to be able to do. On the other hand, we don't want to slow down bus service. It's like there are trade-offs in public policy. This is a pandemic. Our businesses are under stress. We think if your voice was aligned with ours and could lean in and say, hey, now's the time to experiment on Denman. What if because we don't want to lose, 5, 6, 8 of those businesses, 10, 15, it would be. But I'll share something with Jeff and you, Marlene, and you can decide, but we're not super interested in muddying the water. We're kind of looking, there's a residential group called Denman and West Neighbors. And they've come out and supported on a temporary experimental basis, allow the east side of Denman to, bring back the parking, and then in those parking spaces where there's a business that can, allow it to do a patio. But the city, because when you if you close a lane and they're willing to do at that block between Pendrell and Comox, that narrows Denman Street to one travel lane. So buses would be impacted. Now, if on top of that, you allowed cars to park, to come and go, to back in, to parallel park, you know, that might be an extra factor that slows down the traffic. But we're telling the city, if you allow that condition and then put some signs on Georgia and maybe at the Burrard Bridge saying, you know, don't cut through Denman. Please use an alternative route of Burrard and Georgia. The city doesn't seem to be willing to do that. And I think in part, TransLink doesn't want to slow down buses on Burrard Street and Georgia coming from the North Shore. And if Denman traffic was restricted to local business and local only, so your membership can see you quickly get into the, you know, the details, right? These are even Tourism Vancouver trips up all the time because they come in at a high level and they, you know, advocate for maybe a policy at a high level, but the devil's in the details.
Maybe what needs to be, yeah, I was just going to quickly say, you know, on Denman Street, there are 4 lanes. What if during rush hour, you still had the curb lane open for parking or the patio restaurants heading towards, so along Denman from Davie towards Robson and Georgia. But if you had an alternating, like the causeway, so the curb lane going the other way would be open for traffic going towards English Bay Beach, but the 2 lanes in the middle of the street could still be open for 3 hours a day, 3 till 6, still heading north along Denman towards Robson or whatever. Maybe there's a compromise there.
Matt, what were you going to add?
Yeah, I'm just curious, is there or has there been any discussion, as you mentioned, TransLink is a very powerful entity, with you know, helping work through plans about the North Shore SkyTrain extensions? There's a couple of different proposed routes that they've worked. Part of that, you know, if there was the park plan that has, you know, is one of the options, which was the SkyTrain basically following the causeway underground through to the North Shore with a West End based station, that would alleviate a lot of traffic problems, at least I thought. Has there been any discussion, any thought of talking to them about that and putting the BIA's, you know, push on that end of things? I mean, it's a multi-billion-dollar, multi-year plan. We get that, and then it may go the other route. It may go over towards the Iron Workers. It may go straight across the causeway from Waterfront Station. It seems like that would be one of those factors that the BIA would want to discuss.
100%. We're open into all of those long-term, you know, big planning. You know, what we're facing today, Matthew, is a pandemic crisis. We're going to lose businesses on Denman, and there's an opportunity to do something experimental, temporary, and we're just trying to get to yes, the city's moving. On a scale of 1 to 10, we asked them for, you know, 5 or 6 things, you know, 3 kind of major policy buckets. No net loss of parking, because parking is important to retail businesses and to restaurants. We wanted them to change the rush regs on Denman and also on the 1000 block of Davie. And we also wanted them to allow patios to be extended onto sidewalks, not just in the curb lane. When you put a patio 6 feet wide in a curb lane, you're disconnected from the business. So now the server has to cross a busy sidewalk with alcohol in some cases, which, you know, creates more tension on an already busy sidewalk like Denman Street. And then they're out there. There's no access to power. There's basically no weather protection. It's a little bit grittier and dirtier as the buses and the cars kick up dust and grime, and it's harder to keep. There's 9 reasons why that's not as good as being able to extend on your sidewalk and then have the pedestrians during a pandemic walk along the curb lane in those, and you've seen them throughout the city. They're called room to queue and room to move. The city's basically put barricades up and the pedestrian flow is allowed to happen on the curb lane. So we asked for that condition, and I'll share it with Jeff, but I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is we got everything we wanted and we're off to the races, and 1 is just like the city's deaf and they're doing nothing, we're, you know, a 3, maybe a 4. Maybe a 3. in order to have success and really see businesses thrive and kind of firing on all, and we'll make mistakes, we'll need to adjust and tweak, and we probably need to be at a 6 or 7, maybe 8. So there's quite a gap there, and your group could come in and say, hey, it's a pandemic. We love Denman. We know that in the summer, in the normal summer, we have buses and tour buses, and Denman is a challenge because they delay getting from Stanley Park over the, to, Georgia Street, and it's an ongoing concern. But for now, in this crisis, we think the city and TransLink and others should be open to the idea of allowing the rush regulations to be changed on Denman to allow the conditions of incremental new parking to support business surviving, and where it made sense that some of that parking could be reallocated to these curbside patios, even though in some cases curbside patios are not as good as patios on a sidewalk, which benefit from, at least the back of your area where you're sitting is not exposed to wind. I mean, when you're out there, you're on Denman Street or so anyways, the city, there's a very strong advocacy voice around accessibility in the city. So transit and accessibility, and despite a pandemic, we're not going to see a 7 or 8 out of 10, because it would mean, transit and accessibility there'd have to be a little bit of trade-off there. We would mitigate as much as possible and do as much as possible to support, because businesses really need, reliable and fast transit service is great for business too. Full accessibility is really good for business, but those two trump businesses being able to, get a patio, get a bit more space in the way that would help and make sense. So if you guys could have a voice in there, that would be great. If your voice has to be, mixed and muddies the water, then not so great.
Yeah, I like what you're saying about the restaurants, because I'd rather, if I'm sitting outside, I'd rather be with the restaurant right beside me instead of being separated by the sidewalk and the curb lane. Sitting in the curb lane, that's not good. Yeah. What they've done in a few places is that, and then the pedestrians, if they need more space, we walk in the curb lane because it's barricaded off. So anyone, any quick comments? We have to let Stephen go in a moment. He's running way behind now. Any fast comments on that, anyone, or a real quick last question?
Thank you, Stephen. Just wanted to say thanks for the explanation, and it's food for thought.
Yeah. I would say, Jeff, too, on advocacy, I'd also be interested in your advocacy around this winter lighting, or, what do we do in Vancouver in the November to February? Can we build some product together? Can we make the city a little bit more tourism friendly in the wetter, darker months? And maybe your voice could be part of what convinces the Tourism Vancouvers and others to stay at the table, because they were partnering with us, and this year under COVID, they've had to, or chosen to, refocus on some things, which totally understand. But, over the next 20 years, it'd be great to see the city embrace its
I sure like the idea of the winter lighting project and some other kind of a winter thing to bring people downtown. Absolutely. I was going to say a few minutes earlier, Stephen, when it's the summer, when it's a regular spring, summer, or fall, and we're all working, we barely have time to talk to our loved ones, let alone get on the computer for an email or following, news and websites for BIAs that we should. But this year, certainly, we have the time to think about these things and see if we can follow up with one of your suggestions there. Keep us in the loop on that. Send me an email, or Matthew, I can give you that address, or Marlene, we can, any information we can take and send out to our members on our Facebook page, or we can keep on in touch, in tune with what's going on with you on that aspect.
Sounds good.
Only quick, Stephen, with these winter tours, Lumiere tours, basically, couldn't actually BC tourism propagate or advances in other cities and on conventions? If it's in Berlin, it's in Milan or Rimini or other states, other cities around the world during the year. I try to myself with my own company, but BC Tourism just said, well, at least you have to go through Canada Tourism, get that up, and I just gave up, basically. It's hard to get through.
Yeah. I feel your pain. You know, yeah, Tourism Vancouver to a degree, but Tourism Destination BC and others, they're very demand marketing focused, and we're like, you know, where's the product development side? Where's the research and development? How do you incubate something new? And you can't be in and out, you know, this is multi-year, 10, 15-year commitments. So yeah, we kind of found Tourism BC, now Destination BC. I've kept them in the loop. I've kept Martha, I've kept their senior team in the loop and what we're doing. And you know, their response is kind of, you know, and there is money but it's for promotion. And it's kind of like you have to be market ready, right? Are you ready? Have you got a TV audience? Have you got have you got a big following? It's like, well, yeah, we could in 20 years or 10 years or 5 years if we had the support. But they're not willing to be incubators of these ideas. And we were very close this year. We had Tourism Vancouver and the Hotel Marketing Association willing to partner with us. And then the pandemic hit and their budgets just got blown up. And they're in survival mode now. So it is that's where I think your voice, Lumiere really came out of the concierge community in part. It was a couple of concierges connecting with myself. We happened to be doing a lighting piece in part, and we were trying to figure out how to fill in the gap on the event side. St. Paul's Lights of Hope in November, December. So we were kind of lighting the lights on Beach Avenue, the trees on Beach Avenue, get bright nights in Stanley Park, the Robson BIAs. So, and it was really the general manager of the Empire Landmark at the time, Hong Kong-based ownership, said, Hong Kong, Tokyo, Singapore, like these are exciting. When the destinations look and are energetic and dynamic, and in these months, Vancouver is sad. You know, Vancouver is really underperforms, and we're like, well, why don't we start? And so we've been at it through the West End plan over the past 7 years. This lighting event is embedded in the West End community plan. It's now embedded in language in this, if you look it up, the downtown public space strategy. So there's bits of policy. There's just no money that goes with it necessarily on an annual basis. It's all capital plans. So you know what, Jeff, my last point, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. You know, your organization might have 1 or 2 policy areas that are, you know, maybe important to your future. And you decide that, hey, you've got some time, you've got a little bit of capacity now. Why don't you put your oar in the water in 1 or 2 policy areas and stick with it and advocate? And maybe, you know, we can align on this winter product and kind of go, hey, if Vancouver could do this, if they could make the investments, if Tourism Vancouver, if the hotels, if the BIAs could get their heads together, you know, maybe we could create some business for you guys in your down season, so you're not overly reliant on. Now, maybe you like the down season to go to Australia, Jeff. So that could be right.
Okay, wow. A lot to think about. So thank you very much. I know you've got to run, and we thank you very, very much. We'll be in touch. And
Okay.
For the rest of the members, if you want to hang on a minute, but okay.
Thanks, everyone. Bye now.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, bye-bye for now. Okay, that was quite something. And does anyone have any last minute thoughts on Stephen's visit, and then any comments on anything at all?
I think it was a great West End insight. I know it's you have to go myself too, but it's interesting.
I definitely really liked the Lumiere project. I'd never heard of it before. And I do agree that Vancouver is lacking. And I always think that part of it is that we need more shelter from the rain. I'm always appalled every time a new building goes up and they haven't put shelter for those on the sidewalk. You know, it just makes it miserable. Anyway. So yeah, it was interesting. I think from my point of view, as the kind of person that I am, and as part of the presidency this year and from last year, it's very difficult for an entire organization to be behind one particular concept as a group. But I very much encourage advocacy on an individual basis. And even if that means grouping together of individuals on the same wavelength. But as a whole, I think that's 164 people to get everybody all on one way or another. I don't think it's possible, and I don't think it's realistic. So, you know, that's just my thought as far as Stephen wanting it to not muddy the waters. I think we're a group that muddies the waters, and I think that's a good thing.
Well, I was thinking if we, suppose the West End BIA, using them as an example, were to put out an idea and asked us to discuss it, we could do that through a Zoom call just amongst ourselves, since we can't at the moment meet in person. Take in the thoughts and suggestions of everyone and see if the board could come up with a statement that the rest of the membership would hear and listen to and understand and figure out, okay, I can support that. And, you know, but if it was something that we all agreed, wow, that's kind of really controversial and we don't agree, and we, you know, then we stay out of it. But I know from a traffic perspective, the Denman Street business is, boy, when I'm driving a car or a tour vehicle, regardless of what it is, and I've discovered, I'll sometimes do that, like even when I used to drive the buses on a regular basis, and now I'm driving SUVs or tour vans, I often say to the passengers, so if you just give me a minute, we have a couple of radio stations here in Vancouver that broadcast the traffic, and I'm just going to listen in for a moment. We need to go over the Lionsgate Bridge, and that's a real problem area. So just give me a minute, and I'll tune in WX or AM 730 to listen to see if there's any trouble. And if I hear that there's trouble and I know I can't get around, one of my tricky ways of going from the airport to the Lionsgate Bridge, when I know that Georgia Street's a mess and Pender Street and so on, I'll come down over the Granville Bridge, circle around onto Beach Avenue, go into Stanley Park from Davie and Denman there, where you stay on Beach, go into the park, get on the north side of the lagoon, go up Pipeline Road, and if I can enter the bridge via the that on-ramp there. Now that's on Monday to Friday from about 3:30 to 6:30 or so, that's closed, so it's not an option. Right now it's a tricky option because the if you come down Beach Avenue heading into the park, you've got to go around the tennis courts. You can't go directly to the north side. You can still get around to the north side of Lost Lagoon, but again, you've got to be careful of the time zone because of the whatever. But Denman Street having its, I shudder every time I think I have to use Denman Street. Boy, I hope there's no parking along there, because when all four lanes are open, or at least the two lanes in the direction I need is open, boy, things move a lot better and it's much quicker. And you're, you know, especially if you're rushing the other way, trying to get folks to the airport and they've left late, they should have booked you at an earlier time. And now they're, you know, you're under the gun to get them there half an hour, you know, 2 hours ahead of their flight, or 3 hours depending. So anyway, that Denman Street, I can see why the city is kicking up their heels, not wanting to open that curb lane for very much more than a few hours a day, if anything at all. So that's my thoughts on that.
So just getting back to the two that he presented, the Winter Lumiere, I can't imagine that the Lumiere has any kind of controversy where it would affect traffic or affect accessibility, and instead it seems to more focus or geared toward improving and increasing possible business for tourism in those off-season months. So a little bit less controversy, and I kind of stand behind that one.
Yeah, the one thing that's been a problem with that is that I know in some areas where it's been done, the residents get their knickers in a twist because it shines light into their windows.
Good point. Good point. And certainly, yeah, you know, I've had Christmas lights up back on my balcony, and across the street at 10 o'clock, it's too bright, where I'm thinking, oh, just get better blinds, but never mind.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you know, so here again, we come to this point where there's always opposing views. And I don't ever really see CTGA standing behind one or the other. I think we are individuals. And yes, we all get together and network and educate and discuss and refer. And we can certainly post on Facebook links for people to make their own decision.
Yeah.
I think
And I
that's the
know
first. I
rather
think
than
it's the first time
just
we've
go
ever
for-
had anyone say, "Hey, would you guys advocate for us?"
And then he also said, if you don't, you're just going to muddy the water. You know, so he was very, very.
If you do, yeah.
Yeah, or if you don't, you know, if you do, and if it's not all one way. And I think, and I hear what he has to say, so I think that's fair. And you know, so bow out.
Well, I can. Matthew just typed something on the chat about the West Coast Sightseeing had the trolleys from Vancouver Trolley running the shuttle during Luminaire once before. Let me tell you something interesting about Christmas lights tours that happened to me last Christmas. So just before COVID really hit. Normally, once a year I do at least one Christmas lights for some children. And we pretty much could always count for the last 50 years of going into the Boundary Road area between Vancouver and Burnaby and some homes on the south side of the freeway and then the north side of the freeway, again, bouncing back and forth, Vancouver to and Burnaby. But last year, when I went out on a pre-route examination of, well, who's lit up this year, oh man, it was like brutal. But I was able to take people downtown and show them the Lights of Hope, Canada Place, the lights along Robson Street. You know, Christmas time, Robson Street really does a whole bunch of things with the street lights and the banners, and it was really great. The tree at English Bay Beach. Somebody set up, there's an old building on beach on Pacific near Butte, or it's near Thurlow, Butte, Jervis, whatever. And the old building has the old fire escape on the outside. And they hung 3 beautiful horses on the outside there. Anyway, there were a whole pile of additional lights that have shown up downtown West End. And that made, even at, because I was in a car, Nelson and Butte, I want to say, there's a couple of houses in the West End there that light up. So it made up for not being able to go to the homes on the east side, but downtown, and of course, Dave Van Denman, I forgot, because the bear was there, the whale was there. So it's a good idea. You know, draw families out to go walking along Dave Van Denman or drive by. Maybe they can park and go in and have a hot chocolate somewhere.
Well, it's what that comes down to is sort of more grassroots rather than it being part of a BIA. And just brings to mind on the other side of things, do you remember Wall Street Extension? I can't remember the name of the street, but the 3 or 4 blocks where they all had those fabulous Christmas lights. And then with buses and tours going down, it just got too much for the neighborhood and they haven't done it anymore. So, you know.
Yeah, that's Trinity Street. And last Christmas, they've asked the bus companies not to drive through anymore, but cars were still driving through. But I noticed last Christmas on Trinity Street, there weren't quite as many houses lit, but many of the ones that were lit were still worthwhile. I've been encouraging the bus companies to just park nearby, maybe on McGill, and let people out and let them walk over 1 block and walk for 3 or 4 blocks and have the driver move 3 or 4 blocks forward. And then he can just pick them up, you know, at Penticton Street or whatever street's close by. So you can carry on still with a tour that way, but let people walk.
Good idea. Yeah. So anyway.
Anyway, I'll have to get
Yeah,
going.
thanks, Jeff.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's great.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you again, everybody. Nice to see you all. Bye-bye. And enjoy the day. Hope we'll get some more sunny ones back again.
Pray for sunshine.
Yep. All right. Thanks again, Jeff. Thanks again, Matt. Bye, everybody. Thanks for all your work.
Yeah.
Take care. Thank you.
Take care.
See you, Patrick.
Yeah, right.
You know, Patrick, I was going to say, I forgot last time you were talking about your car. I know you've since gotten it, the one in Seattle. I was going to say what you should have done was have someone drive it to Blaine
Yeah.
And if you had phoned the border people before you did anything and said, look, a friend of mine is driving my car from Seattle into Blaine. I just need to cross into Blaine and pick the car up. They might have even said, you know what? Tell your friend to drive your car right here. We'll tell them how their roadway is. And then they might have just said, okay, buddy, we're going to let you in to get your car and we're going to direct you right back to the Canadian side.
It would save me the 2 weeks, that's true. But I did a lot at home. I was okay. I got a phone call from the government yesterday. They do follow up on this. They asked me a few questions because I'm in quarantine and I was registered. So they phoned me up. They asked me a few questions. They said, I thought I was out on Thursday, but they said, no, you can leave on Wednesday. So actually tomorrow I can actually get out of the house.
So where are you going? Are you saying that you're...
No, I'm at home in quarantine, but because when I go across the border, they ask for your telephone number and your email address and the address you're going to be staying at. And then during those 2 weeks, you're going to get a phone call or something, happened, or they knock on your door. In my case, they called me, but just yesterday, and they just asked me how I feel and everything, who's getting my food and this and that. And then they said, well, you're okay to go out on Wednesday and we'll take you off the records right now. So they took me off the paperwork and it was okay. I didn't mind. It was a quick trip. I enjoyed going down to Seattle. It was good. I just have to wait 2 weeks.
So you were able to fly down and then you got your car and drove back.
Yes, the loophole really is the fact that you're going through pre-clearance. And pre-clearance was not mentioned during the first debate between Canada, United States, and Mexico. Pre-clearance is only in Canada generally, and they forgot all about it. So that's the loophole. You actually can get yourself into the domestic area in Canada to land at a domestic area of the Seattle airport, or Chicago for that matter, or New York really. So they all have these pre-clearance in Vancouver. So that's your deal. You get off the plane, you walk right out on the road. There is no immigration, nobody in the United States themselves saying, you can't go in or something like that. So yeah.
Have you or anyone who's still listening in heard anything about, give you an example, my Nexus card is due to expire this October. And last October, I contacted them and said, hey, it's a year from now, but am I allowed to start early renewal? He said, oh, yes, go ahead. Go to the website, which I did. Pay your $50, which I did. And eventually you'll get called in for the interview. It's like you've reapplied. You'll get your interview and so on and so on. But since the pandemic broke out, I haven't heard a word from them. Not even, oh, we know that your card's going to be expiring and we're going to extend your card, or we're going to do this, or we're going to do that, or the interviews will start. I've heard nothing. Have you or anyone heard anything about?
I don't think they're concerned too much about that because you're not going across anyway, and right now they're sitting at home.
Yeah.
Nobody else.
It's looking really grim, I have to say. The 41 out of 50 states, the numbers are just going through the roof. The gist of the American public is either not listening to local news at night, which they don't anyway, and they certainly, they just ran a news bulletin on the screen and in the distance here. All of the hotels and all of the hospitals in either Miami or Florida are just about, they're full. They're basically full. And, this is just ridiculous. Well, they're going to probably have to use convention centers. They're probably going to have to do what the Chinese did, which was to set up a couple of thousand bed temporary MASH unit hospitals. I mean, these guys are totally...
Well, I don't mind them keeping that border closed. It's protecting us. So I'm not... Now I got my car, right? So...
Yeah, we know it's going to be closed for all intents and purposes, at least until the end of August, if not longer. And this is still just the first wave.
No. Dr. Fauci says we're not even out of the first wave.
That's what I'm saying. This is still just the first wave.
Yeah. I can see a lot of tour bus drivers right now. Stories we haven't even heard yet because we haven't been running into people we know. A lot of people have left the industry already. They've moved on, and let's say next year they, you know, there's a cure or a vaccine or whatever. I think a lot of bus companies, tour bus companies, the ones that survive, are going to be desperately short drivers again, because the people they used to have they left during 2020 for COVID, and they're not coming back.
They're working somewhere else, sure. Yep.
We're going to have another shortage of tour bus drivers.
Well, it was already a shortage anyway. A lot of people,
Yeah.
a lot of the drivers were already near retirement, or, you know, it was a part-time thing anyway. So, you know, we know that's going to happen, but at the same time, it's still going to be a phased in return no matter what. There's only going to be a few countries once we do open up our border to an extent. It's not going to be to everybody. It's going to be a few countries at a time. So demand is not going to be slammed, you know, first of all, for, you know, employees, and that it'll be a phased in, you know, return for many companies. They'll have time to hire people or retrain people, and maybe this time they'll actually put an emphasis on training.
George and Heather Bell, I see your name is still there. Other than being glad you're retired and out of it now, any thoughts?
Oh, I am so happy that we're not working now.
Jeff and Matthew, you're doing a fabulous job, and I, for one, am really enjoying all of this input and the speakers that you've got. It's just
Hey,
thank you for doing it.
Thank Jeff. I'm just pushing a few buttons and, you know, making a few comments on the chat and making sure there's some links
Great.
there.
Oh,
So he's the one putting all the work into it. So
You're kind of like the bus driver, and without the bus driver, we don't have a tour.
no,
The wheels aren't going around and round and round and round.
Speaking of George and Heather, I have responded to your request for some information about Farewell Canyon, so you should check your mail after the meeting. And then
Super. Thank you.
free. So I had it on my to-do list, and then it get pushed down lower for the last couple of days, but it's done now, so you got it. So
We've got another week, so that's okay.
Yeah,
yeah, no rush. So
thank you.
He's
no
retired.
problem.
Hi, Patrick.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
See ya.
Okay.
So informed.
Jeff, do we know who's going to be, do we have a meeting next week, Jeff? This is Keenan.
Yeah. On Tuesday, July 14th.
Same time? Yeah.
Yeah, at 10, new start time of 10:30. We'll probably leave that 10:30 start time, even if we go into August or September. And I suppose at some point, you know, I'm thinking that I was talking with a few people last week after our guest left, or at whatever point it was, because last week we didn't have a guest by fluke. You know, the neat thing about these is that you feel like, even if it's just once a week for an hour or so, you still feel like you're connected with people you would normally run into. And, you know, not having our monthly meetings in the wintertime, missing the March meeting and not getting the past books, you know, for the Tourism Challenge. People really, I've been getting a lot of positive comments about, you know, we're not doing anything at home anyways on Tuesdays at 10:30 in the morning. You know, now if it were a sunny day the last few days and today, some of us would probably get up, have our breakfast, do a few things in the house for the morning, but you'd be thinking about, I'm getting out of here. Let's go somewhere. Let's go for a walk. Let's go there. Let's go, you know, something. So, you know, feeling still connected with these. And of course, we're learning new things with each guest. You pick up at least a couple of things of note. Oh, that's why they do that, or that's the reason for this. So,
do you know who the next guest will be? Do we have an idea?
Well, we're working. I'm working on Walt Judas of the Tourism Industry Association of British Columbia. So that's interesting, because he's got a much bigger reach of things. And I had previously thought of trying to talk to the concierge. You know, they have an association as well. Boy, if you think we're hurting, they must be hurting, right? Those concierges are used to, like we, working right from May to October, long hours in some cases. So they're, you know, they're all, you know, some of the hotels still aren't even open. They must be picking up the CERB money, or maybe they've thought about taking another job, God forbid. Yeah, we're always working on people who are tourism or industry related, and I've even thought of I'm toying with the idea of seeing if I can even find some well-known celebrity who has nothing to do with tourism. It might be fun just to see if we can snag somebody, for fun. It would just be for fun, like crazy Ryan Reynolds. Matthew, if you're still listening, we should try to contact his people and see if he'd be willing to talk with a group of crazy tour guides for even half an hour one Tuesday morning.
I think our best bet for a celebrity is not Ryan, though that would be great. No, it would be Seth Rogen. So
yeah, because he's probably in town. Right?
He is. I mean, he's from here. We grew up around Fraser and 49th area, and that's school in Point Grey sort of thing. So, but he's in town. Well, I'm probably not at this point, but he's a regular down at Grenville Island, at Lee's, and that sort of stuff. And the people I know down there, they see him quite regularly. But that's a possibility. Katie Sackhoff, another actress, is in town quite a bit, and she's quite active on her social media about exploring BC and that. So that one might be an interesting one to try for.
And Gary Crosby had asked me to locate Andy Yan. I'm still working on him, and he's kind of busy. He wasn't able to come last week or this week, and he's not sure about next week. So one fellow that was recommended to us by John Atkin, Tom Carter. Tom apparently is from a few emails that he sent me. He reminds me of a friend I have over on the city's west side. He's living in the 18th century. If a thief broke into his house, the thief would look around and he would leave. There's nothing to take. No TV, no fax machine, no computers, nothing. There's still a phone on the wall that is bolted to the wall. It's probably one of these phones. Hello, operator, get me Mutual 683.
There may be someone for you, maybe in December. Donald Trump, maybe, kind of.
Well, hopefully on November the 4th. Yeah.
Hopefully right away, yeah.
Yeah, no, he's, I really wanted if this COVID had to happen, I wanted it after the election, because his base are going to go on for years and years and years about, he would have been reelected. And,
it's the COVID.
No, I don't think so. I think he was going to lose in a landslide, and now it's going to be an earth slide.
Yeah.
Because people are so, it's one thing when you make the voters mad, but when you kill voters, 130,000 dead U.S. citizens, and if I'm a relative of one of those things, and I know it's because of his ineptitude, I'm not voting for you, you clown. And I think, there's talk again on the Facebook today about the Republican Party finally standing up and realizing, oh my God, we're all going to go down like a paper airplane in flames, like the dirigible. We better get rid of this guy fast. And I wish there was a way that Joe Biden could convince Cuomo, New York governor, to run. Boy, he'd win for sure. Joe Biden's got a little bit of luggage, and he's getting on in years. He'd be a shoo-in, I think.
Well, we'll have to see what happens with him. Yeah, Trump. If I wouldn't be surprised he gets back in, because the Americans did it with Bush. They do it with.
No, they did it. They did it with Bush. Was a different circumstance. This guy's clearly shown how incompetent he is, and there was a thing this morning in the Vancouver Sun in the second section about the book that the relatives are planning to put out. Another court order got quashed, and the book should be out on July 14th, next Tuesday. And it's going to have more dirt on what an idiot this guy is.
It's not so much the core voters doesn't matter. They're going to vote. It's the swing voters that are making the change now. And that's where the difference is right now. Had this had some semblance of being under control, I would still think that he would be reelected. But
Yeah,
Not
he
big.
has a fair chance.
as
I think he
this,
will be re-elected.
I think as it continues to spiral and the numbers start to go as high as they are, the swing voters are going to be the ones that come over. His core base doesn't care. He could literally walk down, as he said, Fifth Avenue, shoot people, and he would be just fine. But
Right.
it's the swing voters at this point that will make it interesting. Now, regardless of all of this political talk, it's going to make it very interesting for us navigating those tourists. Once they finally are allowed to come into Canada, it's going to be a very difficult thing for us to navigate groups of people with that fervent, belief system. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. Thanks very much.
Yeah. Thank you for your comments. No problemo.
Thanks, Matthew, too. That's great. Thanks. Hey, Jeff.
All right. We'll be in touch. Yeah.